according to most of the clocks, I think all of them. It is 6:02. I call the City of Grandview Heights Planning Administration Council Committee to order. All members, myself, Rebecca Hudson-Botinos, Ryan Edwards, and Ed Hasty are present, as is the mayor, Director Kazan, Director Jaworski. First item of business is ordinance 2021-16, an ordinance to amend section 93705 of the codified ordinances of the City of Grandview Heights to require owners of construction sites of 1 acre or more to adhere to best management practices for storm drainage facilities. Mrs. Mayor.
Thank you. As mentioned, when this was introduced, the EPA would like us to just put a few more teeth in our ordinance. Mr. Akins, I'll introduce James Akins. He's our engineer who is specializing in this topic in stormwater maintenance and who advises us on our program, and is here to give you a little presentation and perhaps just a bit of background and have you make sure you understand what this legislation is. But again, it relates to the NPDES program, which is designed to prevent runoff, harmful runoff. What the legislation does really is to let us have some ongoing enforcement authority and thereby improve compliance with facilities that are privately maintained and are on developments of 1 acre or more. So as you might imagine, in Grandview Heights, that is not too many. There's actually a new one at the school, but there's under 10. I want to say 6 or 7. So that's the gist of this. It requires establishment of a maintenance agreement, and again, gives us a little teeth to ensure that that's done in accordance with the standards. So with that, I would ask if you would like to proceed with Mr. Akins speaking. With we also have Director Hughes here to give any background that's needed on how this plays out in our programs in terms of the operations.
Yes, please.
So I suggest starting with Mr. Akins, and then if needed, Darrell Hughes can jump in to clarify any of the practical issues around this, how this gets implemented.
Good evening. My name is James Akins with Cmte, and I've been providing assistance to the city for a little over 10 years with the implementation of the overall stormwater management program and meeting the Ohio EPA's NPDES requirements. So this evening I was going to give a little bit of background about the overall program, so you have an understanding of why the city code needs to be amended to address this issue associated with water quality best management practices. So this evening I'm going to talk a little bit about the EPA's Ms4 NPDES general permit, give an overview of the city's current stormwater management program, and then talk about the updates to the program, which would include this amended city code. So NPDES, this is all a result of the Clean Water Act from the 1970s. The Clean Water Act established the NPDES program, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. US EPA authorized state governments, so that would be Ohio EPA here in the state of Ohio, to perform permitting, administrative, and enforcement of the overall NPDES program. So the NPDES program addresses water pollution by regulating point source discharges from waters of the state. So NPDES, it authorizes stormwater discharges from the Ms4 system, which stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, into waters of the state. And the NPDES program runs on a 5-year permit cycle. So Ms4 system, it's any conveyance or system of conveyances that the city owns and maintains that conveys and discharges stormwater runoff from the community into waters of the state. So the city has a GIS-based map showing all of the Ms4 system and the outfalls into the adjacent rivers and streams. So the EPA has 2 permits when it comes to the NPDES permit program, and it's all based upon the size of the community. So larger communities like Columbus has an individual NPDES permit. But smaller communities like Grandview Heights has a small MS4 general permit. And again, these permits run on a 5-year permit cycle. This is the 4th generation permit. It became effective April 1st of this year, and it's going to expire March 31st of 2026. So the small MS4 permit, which the city has coverage under, requires the development and implementation of an overall stormwater management program. And the purpose of the program is to basically improve water quality, discharges, or prevent pollution from mixing with stormwater runoff before it gets into your MS4 system and then discharges into waters of the state. So for example, the Olentangy River. So the stormwater management program has to address 6 minimum control measures, or MCMs. So there's public education, public involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site stormwater runoff, MCM number 5, in which we're talking about the code that's going to be amended this evening, has to do with post-construction stormwater management, and then MCM 6, pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations. Now, the city has coverage under this small MS4 general permit, and then each year the city is required to report to the Ohio EPA, basically summarizing the results of the overall program implementation on an annual basis. And we assist the city with preparing that plan and submittal to the EPA. So to give a little background as far as overview of your overall program, minimum control measure number 1, public education and outreach. It's all about distributing educational materials to the community about what they can do to help improve water quality here within the community and prevent pollution of stormwater discharges. So the program, you have to identify the target audience, your mechanism for reaching out to the community, and try to reach at least 50% of the community over the 5-year permit period. So some examples of some best management practices that the city has implemented over the years. The city works closely with Franklin Soil and Water Conservation District, student education programs, newsletters, workshops, publish articles within city program guides, brochures, and then educational information is provided on the city website. MCM number 2, public involvement participation. It's about creating opportunities for the public to participate and incorporate a stormwater education component to that activity. So in the program, you identify your target audience, types of public involvement activities, and try to have at least 5 activities over the 5-year permit period. So some examples of the city's program is the city maintained website. There's an opportunity for the public to report a concern with stormwater discharges as far as water quality concerns. The city works closely again with Franklin Soil and Water Conservation District, where they hold a series of workshops, and then working with the Parks and Recreation Department. There's been some organized community cleanup days over the years that helps improve water quality. MCM number 3, illicit discharge detection and elimination. It's a program to enforce and detect and eliminate illicit discharges into your MS4 system. So the EPA requires you to have an MS4 map, illicit discharge prevention regulation, illicit discharge detection and elimination plan, and looking at your stormwater outfalls during dry weather periods to see if there's evidence of pollutants. So the city's program consists of having a code, 937.03, which prohibits illicit discharges into your MS4 system, a GIS-based map, conducts outfall dry weather screenings on an annual basis, and then the service department staff attends a training, typical annual training, what to do when an illicit discharge is noted. So MCM number 4, construction site stormwater runoff management. Basically, the city has to develop and implement a program during construction activities of sites greater than 1 acre of disturbance to ensure that the contractors and developers are properly managing the runoff before it gets into your MS4 system. So the city has code that requires erosion and sediment controls to be installed during construction to help manage the runoff. and then works with EP Ferris and Associates where they review the plans to make sure they're designed properly, and they conduct erosion center control inspections during construction to make sure that plan is being properly implemented. So MCM number 5, and this has to do with the code that is proposed to be amended. The city is required to develop, implement, and enforce a program to address stormwater runoff from new and redevelopment projects that result in a disturbance of 1 acre or more, and the discharges then get into your Ms4 system. So regulation has to be established to require water quality best management practices, operation and maintenance plans and agreements to ensure that those best management practices are inspected and maintained, and then stormwater pollution prevention plan reviews to make sure that the best management practices are designed properly. So these are just some quick examples of best management practices that are approved by the EPA. They consist of extended detention, wet basins, dry basins, wetland basins. There's bioretention areas or rain gardens. And there's also underground water quality features, which those are the most common types of best management practices that are incorporated into projects here within the city, just based upon the nature of the projects being on a smaller scale. So, as a summary, the city does have code that requires the post-construction water quality best management practices to be designed properly and constructed. EP Ferris and Associates, they review those plans to make sure that they're being designed properly. And they also inspect the construction of the best management practices to make sure they're being constructed per plan. And then we get to the final minimum control measure, MCM number 6, pollution and prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations. The city is required to develop and implement an operation and maintenance program that includes a training component with the ultimate goal of reducing pollutant runoff from municipal operations. So what the EPA is wanting is for the city to inspect and maintain your Ms4 system, street sweeping, making sure that you're properly storing salt, and then providing training to city staff. So summary of your current program, there is an annual training for the service staff. You guys have a street sweeping program, leaf collection program, which prevents pollutants from getting into your Ms4 system, a maintenance program of your Ms4 system, and then proper storage of potential pollutant sources, such as salt, fertilizer, pesticides, and herbicides. So that's kind of the background of the MPDS program, an overview of your current stormwater management program. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about updates and new procedures. First is an illicit discharge detection and elimination plan has been developed, which can be used as a guide if an illicit discharge is detected within the city. It gives procedures for city staff to follow for properly enforcing the program, reporting, and procedures for follow-up with those illicit discharges to ensure that they're being properly addressed. So another update with MCM number 4, construction stormwater runoff. The city now will, as they inspect the active construction sites on a minimum monthly basis, there's procedures for notifying the developers and contractors if violations do exist, notifying them of those violations and the best management practices that need to be properly maintained per the approved stormwater pollution prevention plan. And then if the notice of violation letter is not correctly addressed, there is enforcement capabilities per city code. Now, minimum control measure number 5, again, about the city code that's proposed to be amended. The EPA is requiring that a stormwater management plan requires submittal of approved post-construction long-term maintenance agreements. That projects that require installation of post-construction water quality best management practices for projects that result in the disturbance of 1 acre or more disturbance. And then develop and implement an enforcement escalation plan if those post-construction water quality best management practices are not being properly inspected and maintained. So per city code, chapter 1113, the best management practices are required to be implemented in site improvement projects that result in a disturbance of 1 acre or more. The city's stormwater, city's engineer consultant reviews those plans to make sure that they're designed properly. And then the city inspects those best management practices to make sure that they're constructed properly. So now with the amended code, there needs to be an agreement established between the city and the post-construction operator, which is typically the owner of the project, or it could be like a homeowners association or condo association. Agreement to make sure that those best management practices are being properly inspected and maintained, and reports submitted to the city for review. So again, it's just making sure that those best management practices are functioning properly and improving water quality of the stormwater runoff before it gets into your MS4 system. So with these proposed updates and that new permit that just came out this past April through the Ohio EPA, it requires the city to update your overall stormwater management program and submit a copy of that program to the EPA by April 1st of 2022. So the process with updating the program, in which Cmte assists the city with making updates to that program, we're going to meet with city staff, city partners like Franklin Soil and Water and EP Ferris to review the current program and the new permit requirements, establish goals, best management practices, and establish a program update schedule. And we're going to incorporate the new updates to the program, for example, like the amended city code that requires the operation and maintenance agreements. Prepare that draft plan for staff review, finalize it for city adoption, and make sure it's submitted to the EPA by April 1st of next year. So that is an overview, big overview of your overall program and where this proposed amended code fits into the big picture of the overall program required by the Ohio EPA.
Does anyone have any questions? Doesn't sound like it.
I mean, just so we're clear, it's bringing us up into compliance with new Ohio EPA permit requirements. I mean, what's the, not that I don't support it, but, you know, what are the consequences for municipalities that don't add this in? You can't issue permits?
Well, the city of Grandview Heights has an PDS permit coverage through the Ohio EPA under that small MS4 permit. And per that permit requirements, it requires communities to require the establishment of the O&M plans and agreements.
But I think, as I understand this, we were already doing it, it just wasn't codified.
Yeah.
So now we're codifying it.
Yeah.
And then that's the long and short of it.
If I may, the operations and maintenance agreements for the facilities with the private owner wasn't required, and it now is according to the EPA. And, you know, the intent obviously is just provide a longer term accountability and compliance mechanism. And I believe those agreements would be filed and would run with the property, if I'm not mistaken, so that future owners would also be accountable.
That's correct. That's an important point to make, is that these agreements do get recorded so that if the property is ever sold or transferred, that agreement then follows that new property owner to make sure that they will then properly inspect and maintain those controls.
Thank you very much for your time. Yes?
Are these retroactive, or is this only on new developments going forward? I get for new construction.
Well, the agreements, as far as if the code or when the code is amended, that would be for new projects moving forward.
Okay.
Projects that currently have best management practices installed, which are just a handful now within the city, there is operation and maintenance inspection procedures as part of the overall site improvement plan. And for that improvement plan, the post-construction operator is supposed to properly inspect and maintain those BPs.
Some of those were handled with actually notes on the plans themselves that required them to do very similar to what this is requiring, but it was done differently. But there were notes on the plans that said they had to do these similar type things. So.
Is there there any further discussion? Are there any motions?
Move to recommend.
Second, all in favor? Okay, if there's, we'll move on to ordinance 2021-18. Thank you very much for your time and your presentation. Really appreciate you coming this evening.
You're welcome.
2021-18, an ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component code of the codified ordinance of the city of Dearborn Heights, Ohio. This is mine. This is just bookkeeping. So this is putting into the actual printed code book, things that we enacted last year that just aren't in there. I went just to, before tonight's meeting, just to double check a few things and see what they were. It's like the short-term rental legislation, it's creating new positions. So this is pure housekeeping. You can go back and look at any of the legislation listed, and it's just crossing Ts and dotting Is. Is there any discussion?
I will say, Leilani and I review these each time that we submit them for codification. I think we're now doing it twice a year instead of once a year, just to sort of get things online quickly, but that depends on our codification service. But all of the traffic type and criminal type things are statutory across the state. We don't have to review those individually or codify them. All of the other ones, we go back and just make sure that all of the tables have been updated to reflect all of the easements or rights of way changes, or, we had a lot of that type of activity this year, so we went back and made sure that that's all reflected in the front part of the code.
Perfect. Anything else? Any motions?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Moving on, ordinance 2021-19, an ordinance to accept the dedication of 0.086 acres of real property to create sidewalk easements and of 0.058 acres of real property to be incorporated into public rights of way for public roadway at a development site at Grave Avenue, Dunham Road, and declaring it an emergency. Ms. Mayor or Director Kuzana?
These are, Ms. Culver can probably address it, but this is part of the Sheets project, and this is really just to get some sidewalk space on the west side of the project and on the north side of the project right away. I don't know if there's anything else that we need to.
Yes, the traffic engineer required a dedicated turn lane into the facility, into the new facility, and so the dedication is related to providing that additional dedicated right-of-way. The easements are because of right-of-way along Grandview Avenue, and because of the shape of the development along 33, that there isn't a room for sidewalk in the right-of-way, and so they're dedicating easements, providing easements for public sidewalk use.
Any further?
Let's
Yeah,
have them
sounds like a
by
good
our
idea to
city.
have a sidewalk there. Do you happen to know, is this going to, or is there any further discussion, I haven't looked in a while, to connect a sidewalk all the way down to the bike path?
Not quite.
Okay.
The city of Grandview Heights ends at the alley that is on the south side of the current Midas. And the next three properties before that, and also the AAA, are all in Columbus. So we've had some discussions, preliminary discussions with Columbus that actually have a similar problem, which is to say they don't actually own right away to be able to, and I think that's part of why that hasn't been done yet.
Okay.
Because there's nothing to, they're going to have some kind of agreement with those property owners to get a sidewalk or multi-purpose path or something through there. So we've been talking with them, but it's not as fall down easy as it might seem.
Oh, no, I can see where it would be, I appreciate it.
There's also some large utility poles in that
Yeah.
respective right-of-way
Yeah.
that are terribly costly and complicated to move, and we'll know. So they do have a desire for sure. They're extremely helpful. We're very pleased with how we have been able to coordinate with them on several things around our borders. And so, it's just a long-term opportunity, we think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
Question, where are you saying to put a sidewalk that would connect with the bike path? Down Grandview Avenue?
Down Grandview Avenue, roughly from 33 down to,
Where is there not sidewalk, just in the corner? I mean, I own one of the properties on there, we have a
Yeah.
sidewalk on it.
Oh, I can tell you, I run that way. the whole
Yeah,
time.
it's-
So there's a sidewalk at the business on the corner, and then there's like a house and a old.
Oh, it is a little path right there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
wordy. Grass.
It's grass with lots of
Yeah.
rocks in it, so there's no more sidewalk until you get to AAA, but there's utility poles in the middle of their sidewalk. I mean, they put a sidewalk in though, but, so there's some missing things there. But thank you for having one in front of your property, I appreciate that.
Technically, the more I look at the map, I don't own a lot of it has a sidewalk, we only have a little finger that gets to the street
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And we tried to just, since we're talking about connectivity, we have been stood up twice by the city of Columbus Parks and Rec in the last 2 years to come and kind of like, two things. One, there was gonna be a kayak boat launch behind where we could use our parking lot. And then another one, we had talked to them about having like a bike corral, like if you're familiar with the bar, there's the, kind of like up a little bit from the bike path, and we had plans to like build some wide steps that went up and clear out some of the brush, but we needed Columbus Parks and Rec, and like legitimately twice Woodland and I went down there for meetings, and both times they didn't show up for it, so. And my current, interactions with the city of Columbus have been less than positive on other topics, so I'm not really dying to meet with them, but if anyone from Grandview wanted to reach out to them about that, like, I know it's not quite there, I mean, I would still do it, they just would require that they actually show up the third time, that's all. So,
for what it's worth, there may be new interest related to the Rapid 5.
That's what I was gonna
Out-
say, yeah.
oh, they gave us a whole rundown, all sorts of stuff, and legitimately just didn't show up.
Well, there's also through the years been talk about possibly in the new road that will go across by Dale Baker, some sort of connection there as well. Especially if they put the bike path in the back area of the Grandview crossing. I don't know if that idea is still alive or not, but I know at one time it was on the table.
Yeah, it is still alive.
Where's Dan the Baker?
He's, it's with
Ridge.
Ridge.
Is it Ridge?
So where would you connect that for bike path?
It would probably involve it would have to have a bridge somewhere.
Oh, I gotcha.
Well, anyway, this is an improvement, if not total completion. I would imagine that Columbus is maybe waiting for those properties to turn over and redevelop for the opportunity to put in sidewalks there and try to do them now, so. Fire
Yeah, that could well be, I think there might also just be simply a bandwidth, like paying attention to it to get it done, kind of thing, which maybe we can help with at some point
Yeah.
down the line.
It would be great to connect that. Okay, any further discussion on that topic? Any motions?
Move to approve,
Second.
or recommend. I should
Yes,
say.
moved. All in favor? Okay. As we have no other items of business, unless there are any other further discussions, questions, comments, I move to adjourn this meeting at 6:31. We are adjourned.